Welcome into the Draft Lab, a weekly series here on Pushing the Pile on CBS Sports Network, where we dive into the 2025 NFL Draft and go position group by position group, inspecting the top guys, what we look for when scouting the positions, and giving some takes on who may be the best at certain skill sets when projecting to the NFL. I'm Mike Renner, joined today by Chris Trapasso, fellow draft analyst here for CBS. And as I said, we're doing linebackers today. We ran through offense. If you haven't seen those, go check them out on YouTube. We ran through defensive line last week, and now we turn our attention to the linebacker class. But before we get to the names who are in my top 10 here, Chris, I just want to hear your thoughts on this linebacker class in general. How does it compare to some past years? And is there talent? Is it deep? Is it thin? What do you got?
I don't think it's quite as good as some of the big time linebacker classes that we've seen in the past. But as I've gotten through the full evaluation of this draft class, I think there are some quality players that are going to represent awesome value late day 2 and into day 3. So I think it's a relatively deep class that at the beginning of this process we thought was not very good at all, but it's actually a pretty good group.
Yeah, I do think that while I have 6 of these guys in my top 100, my top 6 are all in the top 100. And so that's obviously top 100 is kind of your back end of day 2, right? So everyone outside of that is more of a day 3 guy likely to go day 3. But I think there are intriguing guys on day 3. I think there's a lot of athletes, at least in this linebacker class, a lot of guys who, can play a role in an NFL scheme. So let's get to the names. Let's get to the top 10 then. Start off with number 1, a guy that, there's not a lot of consensus number 1 players at certain positions. I have not seen a single person who has a different linebacker number 1 in this draft class than Jihaad Campbell out of Alabama. A true do-it-all sort of linebacker who is tailor-made for the modern NFL game that's using these guys more and more as blitzers. He's so good in that regard, and just so physically gifted. I mean, there's really not any holes to poke in his game in terms of what this guy is capable of. A pretty clean number 1 guy, and really the only linebacker in this class I expect to go in the first round. And I do think he ends up a first rounder, could even be a top 20 guy when all is said and done. After that, it's a mixed bag who people have linebacker to. I went with Carson Schwessinger, the UCLA linebacker, former walk-on, only 1 year as a starter. It's going to be an interesting conversation around him and his limited playing time over the course of his career at UCLA. But what I saw on tape this past year is an athlete that could translate to the NFL, and 2, a play style. The guy plays with his hair on fire, the kind of, blatant disregard for his own well-being that, quite frankly, love to see at a linebacker position. We're going to get into a little more in a few segments here about what we look at when scouting linebackers, but he has a lot of those things when it comes to just what's between his ears and playing the linebacker position. After that, I have Danny Stutzman, the Oklahoma linebacker, one of the middle linebackers in this draft class, a guy who can truly play your Mike linebacker position in a defense, maybe has some limitations in coverage, but I have him there. Demetrius Knight comes in next, a older prospect. He'll be 25 as a rookie, but he started his career off as a quarterback at Georgia Tech before switching to linebacker, a unique athlete that we'll discuss here a little later. Nick Martin from Oklahoma State comes in at 5, one of the best athletes in this draft class at the linebacker position. Guy's a ball of muscle and racked up tackles in that Oklahoma State defense. Chris Paul, former Arkansas linebacker, transferred to Ole Miss, was one of the keys to their defense this past season. Then Kobe King, one of the best stack and shed linebackers between the tackles, a true thumper in the running game. Colin Oliver from Oklahoma State comes in at number 8, a edge who's played a little off-ball linebacker over the course of his career. He's a Zach Bond, Joe Schobert type, who I'm projecting to be as that undersized edge to be a off-ball linebacker in the NFL. Barrett Carter from Clemson, another one of those day 3 athletes I talked about at the top, a guy who, can really roll sideline to sideline. And then Jack Kaiser from Notre Dame doesn't have the athleticism that Barrett Carter does, but he's just a football player. You watch this guy play, and you just think that you can see him having a decade-plus NFL career, even if it's not maybe as a starter everywhere, but on special teams. So now it's your turn, Chris. Who's too high? Who's too low? And who did I get just right in that top 10?
All right, we'll start with who I think you have a little bit too high. And you mentioned one of the reasons why I believe this, Danny Stutzman from Oklahoma. He's been on the draft radar for multiple seasons because of how good he was as a sophomore in 2022 for the Sooners. But he never really materialized and grew as a player in coverage after that. And you spoke to it in your kind of rundown there of your top 10 rankings. He's big. He kind of looks like Jack Campbell on film. He tested very well, but the fact that his tackle number decreased, he didn't make a lot of plays on the football as a junior and as a senior at Oklahoma. I think that's a little bit too high to have him as your third linebacker in this class. Too low. You didn't mention much about him. Chris Paul from Ole Miss. He's kind of the opposite of Danny Stutzman, that he's short. He's 6 foot, 222 pounds at the combine, does not have the big time measurables or the elite level athleticism, but he is so instinctive. And we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but his tackling reliability, I think, is as good as any linebacker in this class. And he plays a little bit faster than his measured speed because he's so instinctive. So I think even from number 6, Chris Paul could be a little bit higher. And the player near the top that I think you have just right is Carson Schlesinger from UCLA. I don't think there's much difference between Jihaad Campbell and Carson Schlesinger on film. They're both sleek linebackers with sideline to sideline range. They're good in coverage. We just saw it a little bit longer of a period over a bigger sample for Campbell at Alabama. Like you mentioned, Schlesinger only playing one full season as a starter, but it was an electric season. He kind of reminds me of Kiko Alonso, just with the way that he ranges at the second level. So I think Schlesinger absolutely deserves to be one of the first linebackers picked in the 2025 draft.
Yeah, I'm right there eye to eye with you with Schlesinger. I fully expect when it's all said and done, that guy's probably going to be a top 50 pick. Like I said, I only think Campbell's probably your only day one guy, but there's usually another guy like an Edgerrin Cooper last year who comes off the board quickly in that second round. I think he's the name that's going to, especially with his ascension. He was listed at 225 this past year. He came the combine over 240 and still jumped 39.5 inches in the vertical. Guy's still very explosive at that size. I want to talk a little bit about Chris Paul, though, because I've gone back and forth on him a bunch. I love his tape. He is definitely a tape over traits guy right now because on, 6 foot 3 inch wingspan for the linebacker position is undersized. 224 pounds is undersized. And when I watch him play, he's not the kind of, so I have Nick Martin at 5, the Oklahoma State linebacker, Chris Paul at 6. When I watch Nick Martin play, he's undersized, but he does not play that way in terms of when he wants to take on blocks. So like when he wants to play physical, he acts as if he's 6'5", 260, right? Chris Paul doesn't have that quite aspect to his game when I watch him on film. He's so good at playing around blocks. He's so quick to beat offensive linemen to the spot. He reads things so well, and I think he has a really high floor because of that. But if I'm being honest, I think there are issues where I am a little worried about how his game necessarily is going to translate to the NFL. Do you see the same things I'm talking about? And are you less worried about it given some other aspects of his game?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with Chris Paul, those are the weaknesses. You outlined them perfectly. He kind of reminds me, though, of someone like TJ Edwards, formerly of the Eagles, now of the Bears, where he was a little bit bulkier than Chris Paul, but just was a great football player because of his instincts and got the most out of every ounce of athleticism that he had. I liked him in coverage, too, just sinking in zone where he wasn't really someone that you wanted to have matched up with a running back on a wheel route or a tight end down the seam. But when he could read the quarterback's eyes, flip his hips and make plays on the football, even though he does not have that long of a wingspan really at all, he continued to make plays on passing downs. We've seen that from TJ Edwards. That's kind of the feel that I have with Chris Paul. I'm not quite as concerned about it as you are, but certainly when you're watching him and then Nick Martin back-to-back, completely different athletes, but completely different players in terms of their polish and how refined they are coming into the NFL.
Yeah, and I will say, for as much as like wingspan matters, size matters, Blake Cashman has the smallest wingspan of any linebacker in the NFL. He's playing the position at an extremely high level. Like it obviously limits you in certain ways, but it is not a complete death knell for certain guys. Is there anyone who it was not in my top 10 that you would go to bat for to put in to the top 10?
Yes, I'm going to rave about him later in this show. Teddy Buchanan from California. He was a big-time combine star, ran 4.60, had a 40-inch vertical. And we're in the transfer portal era that he went from UC Davis being a superstar in that program, transfers to Cal in his final season, now in the Big Ten, And there was really no drop off in his productivity and how much he fit into that defense. So Teddy Buchanan is one I'm very high on. You didn't have him in your top 10, but certainly a lot of prospects to get to in this draft class.
Yeah, I do love, I mean, for my own personal sake, the transfer portal is great for evaluating these guys, because you see him at UC Davis and you're like, what am I supposed to do with this, right? Like, how am I supposed to project this to the NFL? But you see him in the Big Ten, you're like, okay, now we can like actually talk. Now this is football all of a sudden. So he is a guy who really helps himself out via the transfer portal. Not quite in my top 10, but he's one of those, like I said, there's a bunch of athletes who are probably going to go on day 3. I think he's one of them. Maybe you're saying he could go a little bit earlier than that, but this is unique class in that regard, and that there's a bunch of guys to take flyers on in that 4th or 5th round range. That being said, we're going to talk about what we look for when scouting these linebackers, what traits, what specifically we think translates, and what abilities we are going to identify coming up right after this. What do you look for when scouting linebackers and projecting them to the NFL? Well, shoot, I'm not sure the NFL even knows. We're going to get into a discussion here, but it's worth noting, Chris, that the NFL's track record of drafting linebackers highly over the past decade has been an abject disaster. I'm going to run through the names since the 2015 draft that have gone the first round. And if you have a puke bag handy, you may need it. From 2015 on, it goes like this. Shaq Thompson and Stephen Anthony in 2015, Darren Lee in 2016, Jared Davis, Hassan Reddick in 2017, Roquan Smith, there's one hit, Tremaine Edmonds, Leighton Vander Esch in 2018, Devin White, Devin Bush 2019, Isaiah Simmons, Kenneth Murray, Jordan Brooks, Patrick Queen in 2020, Zaven Collins, Jamin Davis 2021, Quay Walker, Devin Lloyd 2022, and then Jack Campbell 2023. The NFL can't do this well. So that doesn't bode well for like anyone doing it well. But what has the NFL missed? If you were to pinpoint anything over the course of that track record and say, like, here's what the NFL is overvaluing and here's what they need to be more valuing, what would you say it is?
I think they overvalue pure athleticism, the big time 40 and the really fast, or the big vertical and the long broad jump, when they really need to focus on, in this day and age, even though we just had the running back renaissance last year in the NFL, it is a passing league. You have to be good in coverage. And it's not just how athletic you are. That doesn't instantly make you a quality coverage linebacker. There's so much that goes into it. Reading route concepts, understanding where you should be in your drop, and just really just understanding spatial awareness and where some of your other defenders are on the defense. A lot of those players that you just mentioned in the first round, great athletes, but just did not have a lot of experience in coverage. They made a lot of tackles, had a lot of tackles for loss, but were very green when it came to being a coverage player and transitioning that to the NFL.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I do think, if you just look at the NFL's track record, they think it is a position that can be taught the way pass rusher can be taught, the way cornerback can be taught. I don't think it is. I think one of the biggest changes in recent memory versus like early 2000s to now is how much linebackers have to deal with motions that, at the snap make you have to reset your gap control and things of that nature. Like your head is spinning at the NFL level. So it is first and foremost a processing position. You are truly the quarterback of the defense. So if you are a bad processor at the collegiate level, the guys that we've seen in that mold, the Quay Walkers, the Jamin Davises, the Kenneth Murrays, that had insane traits, but they already showed that weakness at the collegiate level, those guys more often than not have never fixed that. They have never turned that page in that regard because it's difficult to. It only gets much, much harder once you have to deal with NFL offenses. And I do think that the guys who do that really well, but maybe just have okay traits, are the ones who are playing the position at the high level. I think a lot of people forget that. Like Fred Warner ran a 4.64. Fred Warner was not a freak of nature coming out of the NFL draft. He's a good athlete. He's got a good frame for the position, but he isn't by no means this like high caliber athlete, but he has this processing speed and this fluidity of movement that I think allows him to play linebacker position better than I see anyone else in the NFL. That just like that gets undervalued. So if you have those two things, if you, in my opinion, can process at a high level and you can move fluidly, because most linebacker play is not run for more than 20 yards. Most linebacker play happens within like a 10-yard circle. You are rotating, you are cutting laterally, you are moving, changing directions. It is a short area quickness position. It is not necessarily a long speed position the way cornerback is, the way safety is. Obviously, it helps. Obviously, speed, you want it, but it's not necessarily to make plays consistently in the NFL, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think the perfect word that you used there was fluidity. And that's like what exudes from Fred Warner's film with the 49ers. And the fact that he was a collegiate safety at BYU before transitioning down to linebacker in his final season, he was already pretty adept in coverage and understood that running in a straight line and being really a jagged athlete, that was not going to get him far as a prospect and certainly not in the NFL. And then you mentioned his instincts blended with so much smooth athleticism to his game, make him play even faster than running in the 4.6s at the combine.
Yeah, I love those safety turn linebackers. He's one. Jamian Sherwood's one who just got paid big time for the Jets. Divine Diablo's one. It's a position where you hit the nail on the head. Your ability in coverage comes first. And by coverage, it's more like your ability to play in space effectively. Not every high-end athlete can play in space effectively. You got to see the guy do it on a consistent basis. And so I'm going to trust that tape, how a guy fares out in space, more than I'm going to trust his composite athletic score at the combine, because it's still very much a tape-based position. And that's where I think the NFL has gone wrong. They have overvalued the traits, but there are some traits that matter. And to me, if I'm pinpointing a couple traits that matter outside of what we've already mentioned, it is explosiveness. That's not necessarily, again, speed, but I like linebackers that have high-end jumps, broad jump, vertical jump. That translates to the ability to take on a block and, stop an offensive lineman in his tracks, stop a running back in his tracks. And I like frame. I like big wingspans at the linebacker position. When you have that, when you're a Tremaine Edmonds, right, and you have this ability to get to basically anything you want to get to that's within your frame of reference. When you have these long arms, you just shut down passing windows. A lot of times those guys don't even get challenged in coverage because, well, quarterbacks won't even look their way because it just looks so different when you have a 6'5" guy with this almost 7-foot wingspan in the middle of the field versus a 6-footer with a 6'2" wingspan. It's just, think about it on a basketball court, how different that looks. It looks a lot different on an NFL football field as well.
Yeah, and I think, too, it helps so much. We always talk about arm length with the trenches with offensive tackles and edge rushers. When you are a linebacker and you're trying to flow to an outside running play and there's a guard trying to get to the second level to just completely throw you out of the play, when you have 32, 33, 34-inch arms, you're going to just naturally be a better block shedder to get those blockers off of your frame and to keep them from using all of their power, grabbing onto the inside of your pad. So it's not something that we hear a lot with linebackers. How long are their arms? But I think that's a very astute point that length and wingspan certainly matter at that position too.
Yeah, it's something that the NFL definitely loves at linebacker and at safety as well. Any position that's patrolling the middle of the football field, well, it helps. All right, there you have it. Those are the traits we look for when scouting linebackers. We're going to put them in action now. We're going to tell you the guys who have the best of all the traits, the superlatives of this draft class, coming up right after this. We're handing out some superlatives to the 2025 linebacker class. And Chris, you came with a little bit something different. I have my list of superlatives, but you came and said, these are the traits I look for every single year in linebackers. So you went with 5 traits. We're going to do the NFL guys first to give you people at home a little kind of taste of what we mean when we say these certain traits, and then the draft guys after that. So get into it, Chris.
All right, I'm going to start with athleticism, and it's a perfect segue because we just talked about Fred Warner. And I'm glad that we mentioned and got really specific with athleticism because Fred Warner does not have the 4.4 and the 40-yard dash. You mentioned he ran in the 4.6s. He doesn't have a 40-inch vertical, but the fluidity and the smoothness and the ability to flip his hips in coverage, just be very comfortable in space. I think today in the NFL, and it's probably because he was a former safety, he exemplifies the type of athleticism I want at linebacker. After that, I go with coverage skills. I think they are absolutely vital. And what we mentioned is a big reason why the NFL has missed on a lot of these early round linebackers is that they need to be really good in coverage. I'm going to go with Zach Bond of the Eagles. And I will admit that if we did this a year ago, I in no way, shape, or form would have thought I was going to pick Zach Bond. But after the season that he had in Philadelphia, 3 interceptions, 1 in the Super Bowl, 7 pass breakups, and the way that he just kept everything in front of him in coverage, I thought was really impressive. If this was a year ago, I would have maybe gone Matt Milano or Levante David. But right now, entering 25, I think it is actually Zach Bond, the prototype for what you want in coverage at linebacker. After that, I think tackling reliability is so vital. You just have to be someone at the linebacker spot who is not going to miss a lot of tackles. You're going to be around the football quite a bit playing linebacker. And I think Bobby Wagner is the absolute gold standard. And he's really been that player since his rookie season in 2012 in Seattle. From Seattle to LA, now Washington, 13 seasons for Bobby Wagner. He's averaged playing about 1,100 snaps per season. And in those 13 seasons and those 1,100 snaps, he's averaged fewer than 9 missed tackles per year, which is absolutely insane. Like to not even get to 10 missed tackles per season on average is tremendous. I always think back to 2018. Bobby Wagner played 1,000 snaps and missed 2 tackles. 2. That is Hall of Fame worthy. I think he's bound for the Hall of Fame in large part to just how reliable he has been as a tackler. And then after that, I think block shedding is important. We talked about it with wingspan, and there's a lot of different ways that you can beat blockers who are trying to just pave you out of the rushing lane. I think Leo Chenal of the Kansas City Chiefs really exemplifies how you do it with pure size and power. Chenal was almost 6'3", 250 pounds, coming out of Wisconsin in 2022, had a 41-inch vertical. He's kind of like a Bill Belichick style, like built like a defensive end, but plays off-ball linebacker. You just repeatedly see him on film detonating blockers and almost matching their power, even though they're like 300 plus pounds. Leo Chenal to me is the best pure tackle or block shedding linebacker in the NFL. And then after that, blitzing. Now you can really, and there's some gray area here. You could say, all right, edge rushers, it's probably Micah Parsons because he transitioned from linebacker to edge. But if we're just talking blitzing, I think Ivan Pace of the Minnesota Vikings, a former undrafted free agent, in his first 2 years has become the best blitzing linebacker in the NFL. 35 pressures on fewer than 200 pass rushing snaps in Brian Flores' very blitz heavy scheme. He's not big, he's not fast, but he has a low center of gravity, a lot of power because he's built so low to the ground and really picks his spots better than any other linebacker as a blitzer in the NFL.
That's actually, let me get to my NFL one because I had a lot of crossover there with you. Not a lot. We're not really, breaking any ground here with some of these guys like Ivan Pace Jr., who is insane, was my top blitzer. Guys like Bobby Wagner, my top tackler. I had a few different ones though. Processing speed, that's where I have Fred Warner. I think that's where he wins over anyone else in the league right now, although he could have been like 3 of these. That's how far and away he is the linebacker one in the NFL. Fluidity, Blake Cashman. I think he is so smooth out in space. That's how he gets by. Frame, I went with Derek Barnes. Now you could obviously go with Tremaine Edmonds here, bigger wingspan, but Derek Barnes has a 6'9" wingspan and only 6 foot tall. And I like the squattier guys with long wingspans because it's easier for those guys to take on blocks. It's easier for those guys to play with leverage. And then range right now, sideline to sideline game. I didn't see anyone better than Edgerrin Cooper towards the end of last season. Year 2, I think he's going to be special. I saw him break up a football 50 yards down the football field. You don't see a lot of linebackers in today's NFL or any year of the NFL able to do that. So that's my list for the NFL. How about your list, though, for this draft class?
So going back to my 5 traits that I scout, I think athleticism wise, it's the guy that you had at number one. I think is the best off-ball linebacker. Almost anyone you would ask, and you could have on this show would probably say Jihaad Campbell from Alabama. I mean, he ran 4.52 in Indianapolis. Had a broad jump in the 92nd percentile. He just exudes athleticism in the SEC. We saw it for multiple seasons there. I think he's the most athletic, just best athlete that we have in this linebacker class. In terms of coverage skills, it's the guy that I mentioned in the previous segment as someone that might be too low on your board, Teddy Buchanan from Cal. So he starts at UC Davis that we mentioned. And I said earlier that Cal is in the Big Ten. They're not in the Big Ten. They're in the ACC. I'm kind of confused with all this conference realignment. But in the ACC, I thought he still held his own. He had 4 pass breakups last season after 8 interceptions and 13 pass breakups across 3 seasons at UC Davis. Again, he ran 4.6, 40-inch vertical, very fluid hip flip, and I think he's very spatially aware when there's a bunch of different route concepts around him. Tackling reliability, I'm going to go with one of your guys from Notre Dame, Jack Kaiser. Now, he's going to be 25 in September, and that's probably part of why he's not really being talked about as a premier prospect in this class. But I like that in his 5 seasons playing for the Fighting Irish, his tackling numbers increased every year, and he averaged only missing about 2.5 tackles per season. That is incredible for someone that is a full-time player in the middle of a defense. I think Jack Kaiser just on film looked like someone that stayed square to the line and was not missing a lot of tackles, wasn't diving in an uncontrolled manner really ever on film. When it comes to block shedding, Jalen Walker from Georgia, who a lot of people, and I think you kind of view him this way, Mike, is probably an edge rusher predominantly in the NFL, but he did play 60% of his snaps off the ball last season at Georgia. And for as much as Leo Chenal wins with power and just pure explosiveness and size, Jalen Walker to me wins with the same finesse that he uses as an edge rusher, beating blockers with his hands, that he, on his way to the ball carrier, can do that really well. And then blitzing, I'm going to go Francisco Kiki Maui Noah from Miami. Built kind of like Fred Warner, 6'2", 230 pounds, but 18.5 tackles for loss the last 2 seasons, 9.5 sacks. He's just a really powerful player that plays with that reckless abandon that you want out of a blitzing linebacker. To me, he's the best blitzing linebacker in this class.
Okay, good. We had a little disagreements here. We have some. Now, that's not to say like yours guys are wrong. I agree. Like they are all up there towards the top in all of those, but I have just a few ones different. So we'll get to mine. The all blitzing one, I went with Carson Schwarzenegger, the UCLA linebacker, just because of the sheer will with which he blitzes. 18 pressures on 62 pass rushing snaps this past season. Like I said, the guy plays with his hair on fire. When he's coming downhill, he is going to be an impact player on your third down packages. Tackling, I went Jihaad Campbell. This is where I think he really shines. 5.6% missed tackle rate this past year. Massive wingspan. So the difference, Kaiser, I agree, awesome tackler. I'm not like going to disagree, but I just think in terms of traits that will help him as a tackler at the next level, Campbell has long arms. Campbell has some pop behind him. Campbell has some real juice to go sideline to sideline that Kaiser just cannot match. So that's why I went Campbell here. But Campbell, you could put him for blitzing. You could put him for frame. You could put this guy for range. That's why he's the linebacker one in this draft class. Range, I went Nick Martin, the Oklahoma State linebacker. That's why I'm so high in him. I see him just fly across, from one side of the tackles to the other with just relative ease. That, it's why he was top 5 in the NCAA and stops his last season of college football before getting injured this past fall. Frame, Demetrius Knight, South Carolina linebacker, 6'8" wingspan on a 6'1" frame. I love those type of linebackers, 246 pounds. Not a lot to dislike there about his frame. Fluidity, I went a little off the beaten path here with this one. Kane Medrano, the other UCLA linebacker, you're at a 4.46 at the combine. I think this guy, we talked about safeties playing linebacker. I think he's a linebacker that can legit play safety. He has really good movement skills out in space. I actually like him better in space than I do in the box. And then processing speed, here's going real deep for you. Sean Dolak, the Buffalo linebacker. He's a little limited with this frame. I think like a 6'1" wingspan. The guy is very small for the linebacker position, but there's a reason why he had 32 more tackles than anyone else in this draft class this past fall. The guy plays the position at a really, really fast clip. There you have it. There's our superlatives for this 2025 linebacker class. And there we're going to put a bow on that linebacker class as we get to Chris Trapasso as he joins the show here. His guys, the guys he's going to bat for, the guys he's higher on than anyone else in this draft class. We're going to get to his guys coming up right after this. Since this is the only time we're getting Chris on the Draft Lab, I thought we'd give him the floor to break down his guys, the players, the prospects in this draft class that he's standing on the table for, that he is higher than the consensus and that he believes in wholesale. Maybe I'm overselling it there a little bit with what you feel about these guys. But Chris, you wrote down 3 names here. Break each one of them down for us, and I'm going to give you my thoughts on them after the fact.
All right, there are 2 Virginia Tech Hokies, and I promise I was not paid by the Virginia Tech program to highlight 2 Hokies. I just am really high on these players. I will start on offense at the running back position, Bashal Tutin from Virginia Tech. So he is someone that started at North Carolina A&T and transfers into the ACC at Virginia Tech and was really good the last 2 seasons. 5.7 yards per carry, forced over 60 missed tackles the last 2 years. Really fun on film. Very good side-to-side wiggle. I think he's got quality contact balance, but I like just overall his elusiveness. And then Tutin goes to the combine and runs 4.32 with a 40.5-inch vertical. So he has that game-breaking speed. I don't know if he's quite that fast on film, but you certainly like to see a running back who can run in the low 4.3s and have that type of explosiveness if you want to just try to hit long runs. So Tutin, to me, is the clear-cut second best running back in this class after Ashton Genty. And the other Virginia Tech Hokie,
I got to react to that.
Yeah,
I got to react to Tutin first. Sorry. Because
who do you have?
Number 2, that's not what I was expecting all the way up to number 2. The traits are insane. There's 2 things that worry me about him. One is like the size and just how physical will he be between the tackles at the next level, because the vast majority of run concepts is when you get to the NFL versus college football are going to ask you to basically stick your nose into a defensive lineman's chest, right? Like at some like level, that's the way the run games operate in the NFL, unfortunately, is 3 yards is sometimes a big win for a run. And with him, I just worry about that a little bit. And then also the man fumbled 9 times the past 2 seasons on like 366 carries. That is, to me, a massive red flag, because 366 carries is like, a little over a full season's worth. If you're fumbling 9 times at the collegiate level, I just worry about him ever getting the trust of an NFL head coach if he's fumbling that much.
No, I mean, those are certainly very obvious, fair, weak points to his game. I'm just kind of leaning into the explosiveness and the fact that he was able to go from North Carolina A&T, and the bright lights of the ACC were not too big for him. I don't really think the offensive line was tremendous there either. He did a lot of that work by himself. And at the running back spot, you want a player who can get more than what's blocked for him. And I think he can do that.
All right, who's your other Vatech guy?
Antoine Powell-Ryland, the edge rusher from Virginia Tech. He's someone that I think if he had longer arms, and that's kind of become the theme of this show here, is that arm length and wingspan certainly matters. If he had longer arms, I think we would be talking about him as an early 2nd round pick, maybe even late 1st rounder, because the production is there. And I think he has the best collection or most diverse collection of pass rush moves at the edge rusher spot in this entire class. Name a pass rushing move, Powell-Ryland has used it and won with it in the ACC over the last 2 seasons. When you're evaluating edge rushers from a analytical perspective, you want to see a pressure rate over 15%. As you get closer to 20, you're talking about an elite level of Micah Parsons, JJ Watt, TJ Watt type player. Powell-Ryland over the last 2 years, 16.3% pressure rate. So he ticks that box. And I love the refinement to his game. And then he tested like an elite level athlete at the combine and the Virginia Tech Pro Day. So I think he's criminally underrated in what is a very good and very deep edge rusher class.
I think you hit the nail on the head, though, of why I am probably not there with you. And I want to hear your take on, he has 31 and an eighth inch arms. I don't know
Short,
of, and
very short.
if you know of anyone, I believe Micah Parsons has the shortest arms of any like high end starter or like even just starter off the edge in the NFL right now. And he's 31 and a half inches. And you mentioned like Powell's an elite athlete. There ain't no elite athletes like Micah Parsons. So like he ain't in that caliber of athlete. So is there anyone like, is there a comp for him, or is there a upshot for him of someone in that mold who has overcome that level of limited length, limited frame?
Well, when it comes to edge rushers who are that short armed, there's not really many that you can draw from. I think comparison wise, though, he reminds me so much of Jerry Hughes, who was shorter like Powell Ryland is, but still had a stocky frame. And at TCU, and then for a long career with the Bills, and now with the Houston Texans, he's been able to win with his pass rush moves. And I think the fact that he was able to win with a variety of moves helped him become what is, I think, a quality prospect and produced at a high level in the ACC.
Jerry Hughes is interesting. I need to go back and look. It's been a while since
he has got longer arms. He's got longer arms, but he's Jerry Hughes. Yeah.
All right. It was your last one.
So my last one, I think we're going to agree upon. Elijah Badger from Florida. At 2 seasons at Arizona State, he was the most efficient edge rusher the most efficient yards after the catch receiver, in the entire college ranks. Like, he was tremendous at making guys miss, bouncing off tacklers, and then goes to Florida and you see only 39 catches. And you're like, oh man, he just wasn't able to go from Arizona State to the SEC. But then you see that Badger averaged 21 yards per catch. Was a big play waiting to happen in that Gators offense. I think he has the best release package of any receiver in this class, and wins routinely as a contested catch receiver. So he is the steal on probably early day 3 at the wide receiver class, in my opinion.
And he tested well too. I'm there with you. I have him as top 100 player. I love his ball skills. I love his yak. I mean, the guy can break tackles after the catch. He's very shifty. Little trim frame. I think he needs to play a little bit stronger and get a little bit stronger to be an impact guy in the NFL. But that is a plug and play at worst number 3 wide receiver. And we're seeing what number 3 wide receivers are getting paid in today's NFL. To me, that's well worth a top 100 pick at the end of the day. All right. I'm with you on the last one. First 2, the Vatech guys. We'll see. I like one of the Vatech guys. I like Aeneas Peebles. So I do like one of them. Ooh. But they have a uniquely athletic trio there coming out in this year's draft. We did your underrated guys, your guys. We're going to get in the next block here, get into some of the overrated guys. You got 2 names here that I think people are going to want to see coming up right after this. All right, last segment, we did Chris Trapasso's guys in this year's class. Now we're going to do who he's a little bit lower on, who he's been thinking are getting gassed up a little bit too much. You got 2 names here. Like I said, there are a couple blue bloods. People might get a little bit upset hearing this, but I want to hear your explanations. Who do you got?
Hey, this will probably make for good TV, and especially if you disagree, like you didn't love the Virginia Tech guys, I think this will be good. I'm going to start with Texas cornerback Jahdae Barron. And I know that he is like everyone's favorite. He kind of feels like the 2nd or 3rd cornerback off the board, most likely in the first round of the draft. I'm concerned about his production. 25 pass breakups, but it was across 232 targets in his coverage area. If I'm going to draft a cornerback in the first round, I want a higher percentage than around 10% in terms of pass breakups and interceptions per target in his area. So that is a little bit concerning to me. We've talked about arm length throughout this entire show. Under 30-inch arms, it really concerns me, and I think he's mostly a slot corner, which is certainly valuable, but I don't know if I want to pick that inside the top 20 or top 25. He ran well in Indianapolis. I didn't necessarily see him being a sub 4.4 guy on film, and I don't think he's a great tackler. Like, there are certainly some plays on film at Texas that were big hits on the outside on a screen or on an outside run, but I saw a lot of missed tackles too. So I think Jahdae Barron is a fine cornerback prospect, but like you mentioned, I think he's getting gassed up a little bit higher than where I would ultimately pick him.
Okay. I think your analysis is correct. I do, because so last year when he was a slot full time, and when I thought he was coming out, I remember doing my final draft board and your final regular season draft board right at the end of the regular season. And he was like in the 90s. He was not until this year considered like a top prospect. He was just kind of like a nice slot guy who played hard, but the missed tackle issues are real. He does not always wrap up. He goes for big hits over actually, being a consistent tackler. And it's shown throughout his career. And that's especially concerning if he's going to be playing the slot in the NFL, which is where I think a lot of teams still like him because that's, a super valuable role in today's NFL. He may have some tackling issues that I think have gotten swept under the rug because they weren't as bad this past year, but they were in the past. But I do think he is uniquely situated to be either a slot or an off ball because everyone is running off zone coverage nowadays. So many teams have kind of eschewed man coverage altogether. No one's playing press. And when he is in off coverage, like his ability to click and close and attack the football is awesome. And while he didn't have ball production before this year, he was also playing a slot role that was much different from the outside role. And then I think if you just put him in the role that he played this past season, and again, it's not going to be for everyone. There's not everyone running sort of a lot of off zone the way Texas did or the way he excelled at Texas. But if you do, I do just think he's awesome for that scheme. So I think you're warranted in all those concerns. And I don't think he's quite the versatile chess piece that people maybe are making him out to be, but I'm still probably higher on him than where you're saying right now.
Yeah, it just feels like a little bit too high because I've seen so many mock drafts. I've done a lot of mock drafts where it feels like, hey, maybe he's going to be a top 18, top 20, top 25 pick. I think he's a quality player for everything that you mentioned, but not quite as good as where the hype is ultimately risen with him.
All right, you got another one who you're lower on than the hype right now, and this one I'm going to really fight you on.
Okay, Colston Loveland, tight end from Michigan. I think he is Noah Fant 2.0. I love that he's younger. He's only 21 years old. He is explosive. The separation ability is there. But in today's NFL, two things that I want to see from my tight ends, and I'm thinking of George Kittle, I'm thinking of Mark Andrews. I want yards after the catch to be a specialty, and that just was never the case for Colston Loveland at Michigan. And I want you to be a contested catch ball winner down the field. Now, maybe we would have seen those things from Loveland had he not gotten hurt last season, but we just didn't see it. In his body of work that he had at Michigan was not very productive after the catch and was not this big-time rebounder using his body to box out cornerbacks and safeties down the field. So I think he can get open, and I think Noah Fant's been a quality player, but as another first-round tight end who hasn't quite lived up to the hype, that's what I could foresee for Colston Loveland in the NFL.
See, with Fant, though, coming out, I didn't think he could even get open on his own. He was not a true separator, whereas Loveland gets open. And to me, that's first and foremost, I'm evaluating tight end. Can they run routes? Can they get open? If that's a yes, we can take it high. And I agree, he's not great after the catch. He's not what you traditionally think of for a first-round tight end in that regard. Definitely not like Brock Bowers or anything. But he has speed, and you've seen some creativity with him after the catch. So if he gets open that well, and you mentioned he's 21, he's not quite 21 yet still. He's still only 20, turns 21 in April. So all that put together, I think we're just going to have to disagree on Loveland and on Barron. But I love the list. Thanks, Chris, so much for joining the show today. Thanks so much to you guys for tuning in. We'll be back next week breaking down this cornerback class. It's a kind of a thin one, but it's a fun one to break down with a lot of unique skill sets. Until next time, keep pushing.